I mean, I'm thinking and looking all the time and listening all the time and trying to see how people experience their home and how they experience their neighborhood to really get to the heart of it. And with that, I'm always, I'm very fortunate. I've got my partner is a writer and lecturer in architectural history. So we like going and looking at places and going to strange places and thinking about them and talking about them. In terms of people that I admire, who have sort of influenced my way of thinking about housing, you can't not point to the sort of 19th century crusaders for better housing conditions and better housing management. So people like Octavia Hill, who has a great legacy with the Church Commissioners' estates, including a big one we've got in Woolworth, albeit fully privatised now. But people who were really kind of pushing for spacious, green, light housing, but also had a really rounded view of the rights and responsibilities of a tenant and also of a landlord, and had that approach to whole person care. So it wasn't just a kind of cold transaction. It was a much fuller relationship between the housing manager and those who lived in that housing. Has been a big influence on me. People like Jane Jacobs, everything she writes is interesting, but key kind of thinker, thinking about the interplay of old and new buildings, old and new industry, how cities evolve, how development economics influences what's possible in a city. People like Colin Ward, who I greatly admire as well. He was a kind of scrappy, radical, anarchist self-builder, but also an officer at Lewisham Council in the 70s and 80s. I think in terms of the projects he did, he's best known in terms of the projects for the self-build schemes he did with Walter Siegel, a great German architect, near the border with Southwark, actually. But I just really admire a lot of his writing. He has a book called The Child in the City that talks about how the built environment shapes that relationship children have to the society they grow up in. And that's kind of a lens that I look through often, particularly in relation to great estates and our approach to tenure, integration and equality through our social regen approach. In Southwark, I'm always thinking about what perception rich kids and poor kids have of where they live, and whether they think, oh, that's where rich kids live in that part of town, I live here, and what that kind of means for their psychology, their self-identity and their course through the life.
Was that something that you were particularly aware of growing up? Is that a sort of
I had a mix of housing growing up. I generally grew up in sort of suburban house in Watford. Originally, before that in Bushy, but I was also really acutely aware of the different types of housing that surrounded me. When I sort of came out of university and started doing my kind of slum existence in my 20s, I saw it all: damp, dingy conditions, tenure insecurity. I even was on the receiving end of a retaliatory eviction at one point when I refused to pay the major work service charge of my landlord, which wasn't in the tenancy, obviously. I got my deposit times plus a bit more back in that case. But that's been an influence. But really, just having an inherent interest in housing and in neighbourhoods. There are a lot of architectural writers, people like Ian Nairn, who writes about towns and cities with incredible knowledge and feeling, I think brings out the kind of subconscious impacts that the built environment has on people, really teases out the atmospherics, the identity of a place, prompted me to be reading and thinking and listening to people in relation to housing and neighbourhoods. So those are some of my influences and backgrounds.
And do they feed directly through into your work at Southwark Council now? Are you conscious of taking those influences and sort of wielding them in Southwark?
I don't sort of consciously say apply this kind of thinking to that problem, but certainly my attitude to council estates is probably influenced by that. In that, a lot of estates failed. They were built too quickly and cheaply. They were not well laid out. The economic and industrial backdrop around a lot of estates created really challenging situations. But I really do think that we need to be celebrating our estates a lot more and talking them down a lot less, because they are a great 20th century legacy, particularly in Southwark. You know, it's pretty much the bedrock of our borough that makes it a really strong, diverse, mixed community that it is. That we have so many council estates, and this great legacy from previous generations, and we should be proud of it and try to build on it, in my view.
Thank you very much, Councillor, for answering our questions today. Viewers, if you'd like to see more of this interview, it's posted in 7 parts over 7 days at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. The Voice of Authority presents the ambitions, the challenges, the values, the drivers, the motivations and the influences of key people at councils in their own words. This is where you find out what matters most to top people at the councils you want to do business with. The Voice of Authority is one of the channels created by 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils, to keep our network of councils, developers, investors and their advisors and influencers connected. Find out more about our channels and opportunities to participate in webinars, in interviews and other campaigns at www.3fox.co.uk.